hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Welcome to the show. Let's start with the Mueller investigation. As you may know, the 17th of May marked the one-year anniversary of Robert Mueller's investigation into collusion between Donald Trump's campaign and operatives or agents of the Russian government who were out to meddle ostensibly to throw the campaign in favor of Donald Trump. Yeah. Well, let's take a look at some of the reporting. Most of the media reporting was very generalized in saying what Mueller had accomplished. One exception that didn't quite lean that far in that direction was Al Jazeera English. They recorded this report back on the 17th of May.
We know how U.S. President Donald Trump feels about special counsel Robert Mueller. Rarely a day goes by when he doesn't find a way to complain about it on TV or Twitter.
There was no collusion with the Russians. There was nothing. There has been no collusion. They won't find any collusion. It doesn't exist. It's a witch hunt. That's all it is.
That's what he says, but Mueller's actions are hinting at the opposite. 4 people so far have pled guilty to lying to investigators, including a top campaign official and his former national security advisor. His former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, is facing a host of charges, from conspiracy to tax fraud. And 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies have been indicted for allegedly interfering in U.S. elections, using computers in the St. Petersburg building to sow discord in the U.S. And Trump's legal problems are potentially expanding beyond Mueller. His former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, has had his office and home raided by investigators in New York. He was well known to record conversations. The FBI confiscated more than a dozen cell phones and computers and 10 boxes of documents. For some legal experts, that is casting further doubt on Trump's claims of no collusion.
He can't know that yet, and nobody can know that. We don't know how much Mueller knows, and we don't know how much Mueller can prove. Remember, before a month ago, we didn't know that he had any information about Cohen, and it turns out that he was collecting information for at least 6 months. So we don't really know the scope of what he can prove.
From the beginning, Trump has taken the unprecedented step of attacking the people investigating him.
These people have the biggest conflicts of interest I've ever seen. Democrats, all, or just about all.
They are not. Mueller is a lifelong Republican, the president's party. But Trump's attacks are having an impact with his core voters. According to one poll, only 17% of Republicans have a favorable opinion of Mueller. And a majority, 55%, say his investigation is unfair. People close to the president have publicly begun to call for things to wrap up. The president has reportedly thought about firing Mueller a few times. A year in, it is not clear how much more time Mueller needs or if the president intends to let him have it. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's break some of that down again. And that was a more balanced view, but you'll notice the one thing that they leave out is a simple fact. There's no evidence of collusion. Well, what about all the people who have been indicted? Well, we've had people indicted for lying, but there's still no indictment for collusion. Michael Flynn, of course, was a big-time fish for Mueller, and he was indicted for lying about meetings that occurred after the election. What does that have to do with collusion during the election? There was another guy, Papadopoulos, who was indicted for lying to the FBI, but these were both in the case of Flynn and Papadopoulos, those were process crimes. There's no mention of collusion. The 13 Russian individuals and the 3 Russian companies that were indicted. Yeah, I want to see that go to trial. Good luck with that. Collusion was not mentioned. There were like 40 pages of information in the indictment, and collusion was not mentioned once. And as far as we're going to indict and convict some foreign government for trying to sow discord in the United States, good freaking luck with that. Is there a country out there that is in any way, shape, or form competing with the United States that is not trying to sow discord in the United States? Let's not forget that under Barack Obama, the U.S. was doing a whole lot of trying to sow discord in other countries, including direct and outright interference with elections in Israel. Oh, we can't talk about that. So you want to indict the Russians for meddling, but you still don't even mention the word collusion. You're going after Manafort, and now you're taking him to trial for stuff that happened at least 6 years before Trump was even a candidate. Are you serious? You're going after him for stuff that happened in 2010. How was that even within the scope of the investigation? There was no election. There was no Trump as candidate. There was no campaign. How could anything that happened in 2010 be relevant to Russian collusion in 2016? This is ridiculous. The one thing that I want to go back to the fact that they keep overlooking the fact that there's no collusion. I just broke down a lot of what they are talking about, and they're putting that out there. This is the big deal. Look at all the people who've been indicted. Look at all the charges that have been filed, and none of them have a blasted thing to do with collusion, which is the whole reason you brought this, yeah, it's a witch hunt, together. You were supposedly looking to prove that there was collusion. Well, back on the 13th of March, RT went out and looked at the House Intelligence Committee's report on Russian collusion.
Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee have closed the book on Russian collusion in the 2016 election. They have concluded there is no evidence of collusion, coordination, or conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. Manila Chan has been following the story and brings us the details. Certainly the president is touting this big.
Oh, that's right. And case closed by the House Intel Committee. And as they say, it was a big nothing burger. The abrupt end to this investigation highlights the stark partisan divide within not just this committee, but between most lawmakers on Capitol Hill right now. The Republican Intel Committee, while agreeing with U.S. intelligence communities that there was some degree of Russian meddling, they disagreed that the interference was to benefit Trump. Now, House Intel Chair Devin Nunes had this to say to the press this morning. He said, quote, "We spent 14 months on this investigation looking for collusion. We didn't find any. We interviewed many dozens of witnesses, people all around the president, nearly everybody involved in the campaign. All of them have testified under oath that they had no contacts with the Russians." Now, the GOP Majority Committee will give its 150-page draft report to the Dems tonight before seeking full committee approval to publicly release the whole thing. The draft document contends that there is no evidence of any collusion between Donald Trump, his campaign, and the Russian state. This, of course, was music to the president's ears, tweeting this last night. He said the House Intelligence Committee has, after a 14-month-long in-depth investigation, found no evidence of collusion or coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia to influence the 2016 presidential election. And this morning, as the president headed out to California to see prototypes of his wall, he shared an "I told you so" moment with the press.
We're very happy with the decision by the House Intelligence Committee saying there was absolutely no collusion with respect to Russia. And it was a very powerful decision, a very strong decision, backed up. I understand they're going to be releasing hundreds of pages of proof and evidence, but we are very, very happy with that decision. It was a powerful decision that left no doubt.
So there you have it, a sudden end to this, at least this portion of the investigation by the House Special Committee. This, though, separate from that of Special Counsel Bob Mueller's investigation. But, Ed, what I found, I think, most interesting about the closing of this investigation by the House Committee is that everyone has largely been silent about the whole thing. Perhaps this news was just, I guess, dwarfed by the State Department shakeup this morning. But really, it seems almost odd that the House Intel members aren't really speaking up about this. And we're 24 hours out from that announcement.
I'm surprised that Trey Gowdy hasn't jumped out and said something about this, former prosecutor who's leaving the Congress.
Yeah.
Let's back up. No evidence. And at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. No evidence. Nothing that you can prove. Nothing that you can even pursue to prove. Let's make sure you understand what evidence is. Evidence doesn't prove it. Evidence is the elements of proof. I put enough evidence together, I put that with a theory, and I put that with a storyline, and I bring all these things together, and it makes sense, and it is reasonable, and therefore we can conclude. You don't even have evidence. You got nothing. But it is interesting how quiet people are in elected office, with the exception of Nunes, the Republican who was heading the committee and came under tremendous political pressure, and Adam Schiff from California, who is just a bobblehead who says whatever he can to try to keep himself in the spotlight and try to impeach Donald Trump. There's no evidence. You can't find anyone anywhere at any time after a year of this witch hunt, after a year of this thing that Van Jones was spotted on the street saying, yeah, the Russian thing, it's a nothing burger. Well, what does Van Jones know? Well, okay, Van Jones knows a lot when progressives want to seek him out on something. Van Jones is connected to a lot of people who are politically involved. He is a political pundit. He is an operative. He has information. And he knows this is nothing. But, of course, since he's not part of the investigation. Oh, you mean the investigation where we've already demonstrated that there were people who were biased against the president? Are we talking about the investigation where we know that the investigators have decided to ignore certain things about the Democrat part in the involvement with Russia? Who funded that fusion GPS report? Who did all this stuff? And if we're going to go outside the scope of the original investigation, which they have done with Manafort, why aren't we talking about Uranium One and how Hillary and Bill Clinton sold 20% of U.S. uranium to the Russians? How come that's not part of the investigation? That's got to be at least as relevant as Mike Flynn lying, in your opinion, about a meeting that occurred after the election was over. But we're not talking about that. And we're also going mute on Capitol Hill about the fact that there is no collusion. For example, Chuck Schumer and Paul Ryan, who are supposedly or supposed to be in different political parties, one actually should be ostensibly supporting Donald Trump as president, and you can imagine Chuck Schumer, of course, is going to oppose him. Here's what they had to say to mark the anniversary of the Mueller investigation.
I would say to the president, it's not a witch hunt when 17 Russians have been indicted. It's not a witch hunt when some of the most senior members of the Trump campaign have been indicted. It's not a witch hunt when Democrats and Republicans agree with the intelligence community that Russia interfered in our election to aid President Trump. Any fair-minded citizen, even the most ardent partisan, should be able to look at the facts and say that this investigation is not a witch hunt.
Recently, the vice president told Andrea Mitchell that he thinks it's time for Mueller to wrap it up. Do you agree with the vice president?
Well, I think he should be free to do his job, but I would like to see it get wrapped up, of course. I mean, we want to see this thing come to its conclusion, but again, I've always said he should be free to finish his job.
You don't think it should be accelerated?
It's been a year. My guess is he's probably coming to a conclusion. I can't speak for that. You'd have to ask them that.
I love it when I hear Chuck Schumer talking about a fair-minded citizen. I love it when he says it's not a witch hunt when 17 Russians are indicted. What were they indicted, Chuck? The senior members of the campaign, for what were they indicted, and how come the word collusion has yet to cross the lips of anybody or appeared in any indictment? Why is that after a year? Because it didn't happen. And as for Paul Ryan, I think he should be allowed to. He's been doing this for a year. He's not going to wrap up. And what I love is the political punditry of hiding behind the notion that Robert Mueller, is actually conducting an objective investigation. He's not. The majority of the people on his team are anti-Trump. Some of them demonstrably so, and were kept on as part of the team. We haven't had anybody looking into the idea that, you know what, some of the things that were used to validate or to petition the court for surveillance of Trump were false documents funded and or provided by those who were trying to elect Hillary Clinton. We're not dealing with that. We're not really investigating that. How come nobody who was a part of the Fusion GPS report, how come they haven't been indicted for colluding with the Russians? Because they really did. How come we're not taking John McCain and indicting his dying behind? Because he has as much to do with this nonsense as anybody. But we're not. I digress. Let's be clear about something. There is no collusion. We got a year of this. All this is designed to keep public pressure on Donald Trump. We understand that. But even as that goes on, the number of people who support this is starting to shrink. And this is polling from the Washington Post, or at least they're citing the polling. And we already know since the 2016 election that polling does not reflect actuality. And when I say that, I mean it skews toward the progressive point of view. But even now they are acknowledging, for example, the number of people, the percentage of people, and this is a Monmouth University poll, finds 54% of Americans saying the special counsel's investigation should continue. Well, that's 54% say we're on the right track. Yeah, but that's down from 60% in March and 62% in July of last year. 43% say the investigation should end, and that is an increase of 6 points since just March and 10 points since July of last year. This thing's running out of steam among the people. The reason? There's nothing going on. It's time to put the foolishness aside so we can actually expose the parties for what they are and what they are not. The Republicans are a bunch of do-nothings with the exception of the conservatives who don't have the numbers to do much. The Democrats are a messageless group of people trying desperately to hold on to power by criticizing those who object to their agenda of identity politics. Hurry November. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin', we'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. In case you missed it, the Supreme Court back on the 14th of May of 2018, they actually supported the 10th Amendment right of states to do as they please within their borders, which is something upon which the Constitution was originally grounded and founded. In specifically, they limited this to a specific thing, and that is sports betting. They ruled with respect to New Jersey that it can legalize sports betting within their state. Now, USA Today actually went out and had somebody standing on the Supreme Court steps, as they tend to do to try to for dramatic effect, to kind of break down what the ruling meant in terms for the states and for the sports, etc.
This news could change the sports world forever. The Supreme Court ruled to overturn a federal ban on sports gambling in New Jersey in a monumental decision that will have lasting ramifications on college and professional sports in America. We had the chance to speak with our legal expert, Richard Wolff, who joined us from the steps of the Supreme Court to break it all down. All right, Richard, in layman's terms, what does this ruling mean for sports betting in America?
Sports betting in America is currently legal in Las Vegas. This Supreme Court law now allows other states beyond Nevada to, in effect, legalize sports betting on their own, regulate it on their own. So the feeling is that there will be several states before the end of the year, maybe 10 or 15, that have legalized sports betting, and as a result, Americans will be able to bet legally as opposed to illegally on individual games.
The NCAA, though, has vehemently opposed this ruling. What is their argument against it?
They basically backed the law that was passed in 1992 by Congress, which said that in order to protect the integrity of the games, sports betting should continue to be illegal, except in Las Vegas where it was grandfathered in. And at the time, it had overwhelming support. The point of it was we're going to protect the integrity of the games so that, you know, when you're watching particularly college-level sports, you don't have people who are rooting one way or the other because they've got money on it. The downside of that argument for the majority on the Supreme Court was, well, as a result, it's all underground. It's offshore betting, it's illegal betting, it's organized crime, and that gradually became more and more of a winning argument over the course of the last 25 years.
What's the reaction from the four major professional leagues? In the past, they've been opposed to sports gambling, but that opposition has seemed to wane.
From the professional sports league's point of view, the handwriting has basically been on the wall. For instance, the National Hockey League now has a Las Vegas team. They're actually fighting for the Stanley Cup right now. The National Football League is about to move the Oakland Raiders to Las Vegas. The NBA commissioner has basically said, this is the way we're going, so we're going to get behind it. So I think the professional leagues have been a little more realistic than the NCAA in terms of where this was headed.
Do you think this ruling could change the way we consume sports?
Well, I think that, you know, if you consider the effect of fantasy leagues, for instance, I think a lot of Americans are watching professional sports these days thinking, how is my individual rotisserie league team doing? And to some degree, I guess that does change what they're rooting for. Rather than rooting for their home team, they might be rooting for how they're doing in a fantasy league. So I guess to some degree, yes, it changes. But the bottom line, I think, for the justices was this is going on anyway, and it's illegal. And it won't change the nature of the game for those who don't bet. Or who aren't gamblers. And for those who are, there will be a dual interest now. There will be the interest of their bets, which they've probably already been placing illegally, and there will be the traditional interest of rooting for the home team or just enjoying a good baseball game.
Thanks so much for joining us, Richard. And in the meantime, stick with Sports Pulse, your heartbeat to what's trending in sports.
There is a lot in that to kind of break down. Let's start with the idea that the Supreme Court, back on the 14th, said that New Jersey can legalize sports betting, and that, of course, opens the doors for other states to do the same. Las Vegas, or Nevada, the state of Nevada, was grandfathered in. Back in 1992, Congress passed a law, and this was basically to protect the integrity of sports and try to, let's just face it, America was anti-betting more than it is now. This is not so much a change in law as people in the judiciary and in other parts of society have recognized that the American people do not view betting as something that is detrimental. Now, I personally think they're wrong about that. I know they're wrong about that. You know, Gamblers Anonymous is not going anywhere, and the detrimental effects to families and individuals as a result of gambling is well documented. Nevertheless, in 1992, there was a strong support for passing a law that limited banning on a federal basis, and that support is gone, and therefore the Supreme Court says, well, you know, because people are doing it anyway, they want to bet anyway, and they're going to circumvent the law, so we might as well get out of the way and let them do it, let them handle it on their own in the states. I find that interesting. Now, of course, they didn't take any position on the morality of betting or gambling or the harm done by gambling. They basically punted that over to the states and said, you guys do what you want. We're going to wash our hands of it. This is where it gets interesting to me. If you know much about the history of this country and its Constitution, you would recognize that the federal government, until you had the Reconstruction Amendments, the 10th Amendment was rarely compromised. People did what they wanted within their states, and the feds didn't have much to say about it. Then, of course, we had the Civil War and the desire to come up with some manufactured equity among races, and therefore you came up with Amendments 13, 14, and 15, which basically told states that your 10th Amendment rights no longer exist in areas where we don't want them to exist. Of course, you bring that forward into things like, Roe v. Wade. You bring that forward into things like, same-sex marriage. So here's my question. I would argue that homosexual marriage and abortion are of greater consequence to this nation than whether or not states can regulate betting. So let me ask this question. Why is it that you're willing to allow the states to figure out gambling on their own, Supreme Court, federal government, but you're still not allowing states to work out the issues of infanticide or homosexual marriage on their own? So they're capable of figuring out what to do with money, but they're not capable of figuring out what to do with infanticide and societal norms. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Is it personal, is it popular opinion that's the deal? Because popular opinion was against betting on college games and the like, because we didn't want to compromise that. People now don't really care about compromising anyone else when they bet money. They don't care anymore. But if popular opinion is enough to sway the Supreme Court with respect to betting, gambling, why isn't that same opinion effective in having them get out of the way of abortion and allowing the states to regulate that? We have 20 or more plus states. We have a grip of states who are aggressively challenging the right to kill children in the womb. And they're taking more and more aggressive steps throughout the middle of the country for the most part. You know, that what progressives and other liberals consider flyover country, because it's not important. It's not where they hold sway, so therefore it's not important. For example, Mississippi, South Carolina, and 20 other states, and Ohio is out there to just make it just outright illegal to kill a child in the womb. In short, I dare say, in a more dramatic manner and on a much more important issue, the country has decided that killing children is no longer in vogue. And they have shown to their elected officials that that is their preference. So please explain to me how come the Supreme Court has not struck down Roe v. Wade. I would argue that the Supreme Court notion that they should have anything to say about homosexual marriage is kind of odd. Perhaps you are not aware. 31 U.S. states have constitutional amendments that ban legal recognition of same-sex unions. 31. 31 out of 50 states have state constitutions that ban legal recognition of same-sex marriage. So let me get this straight. Why is it that the Supreme Court is going to listen to public opinion regarding betting, but they're not going to listen to public opinion regarding homosexual marriage? Well, they're changing. The people are changing on homosexual marriage. Well, then get the feds out of it, and let's see if they can actually have those changes enacted at the ballot box. That's fine. I personally think homosexual marriage is abhorrent, but I have no problem with the idea of federalism, which would allow the states to determine that for themselves. Well, this is bigger than ever. No, it's not. It's about human rights. You don't have a human right to be a married homosexual. Not by the government. You do not. Not to mention everything that married couples get, quote unquote, by default, homosexual couples can get with more effort, but they can have the same protections. They can have the same everything. It comes down to simply not calling it what it is not, which is marriage, and 62% of the states have already said, we don't think that's appropriate. And California said so twice. California said so twice. So someone explain to me where this selective respect for the 10th Amendment comes from. Because for me, that's a bit of a problem. Why do states now have 10th Amendment right to regulate gambling money, but they still don't have their 10th Amendment right to regulate infanticide or societal norms within their borders? Do you not understand what's really going on here? And they've kind of let the cat out of the bag by even having this ruling. And why do they let the cat out of the bag? Because it's clear that public opinion is what swayed them. But they're hypocritical, because public opinion, by a matter of law and constitution, was never in favor of homosexual marriage and still is not. The law, as being shown by state after state, doing everything they can to restrict access to infanticide in the womb, is demonstrating that public support is for those same limitations, and maybe you should just let the states figure it out on their own. States like Washington and California will and New York will still continue to slaughter children in the womb. Other states will simply say no. Well, that just means a woman doesn't have the right. No, she doesn't have the right unless she can't get plane fare or bus fare. And I'm sorry, I tend to think a human being's right to living is greater than your right to killing him for no reason. Maybe I'm in the minority. I just don't think so anymore. Bear this in mind. There's going to be another Supreme Court vacancy. Could happen before the end of this presidential term. If that occurs, with this precedent being set in favor of 10th Amendment rights to the states to regulate what goes on within their borders, then all this homosexual agenda about who has to provide services to whom, who's going to get married, that's being challenged in some states as well. I think in Mississippi they've already let their clerks know, if you don't want to give out these marriage certificates, then you don't have to. They've already made that clear. But if we see another Supreme Court vacancy that is filled with someone who is in the vein of, say, Antonin Scalia or Neil Gorsuch or Clarence Thomas, which is more likely than seeing another Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in my opinion, at least under the current administration, I think we're going to find something out very interesting in this country, which is what exactly do people favor? And allow that to be determined on a state-by-state basis, which is exactly what the Constitution envisioned. If you have a problem with that, there are at least 190 other countries in which you can live if you can't find one of the 50 states that suit your tastes. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin' here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmerica.com, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, forgive me. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the first hour. The Farm Bill goes down to defeat as conservatives flex their muscle. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Farm Bill, every 5 years or so, last time this came up was 2013, and there was contention about it then. About every 5 years, Congress authorizes subsidization and nutrition programs and other things associated with supporting, quote-unquote, the nation's farms. They don't do it every year because they determined that it was too contentious and they'd never be able to get it done. So they do the heavy lift once every 5 years and then they skate. Last time they did this was 2013. They couldn't get it done in 2013. It leaked over in 2014 because there were issues with work requirements for food stamps, among other things. Well, it came up again this year. 2013 was the last time, so now we're in 2018. It's due. And we had the following occur this past 15th of May.
Farm bill failing in the House. Eamon Javers is in D.C. with the details. Hey, Eamon.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. This one is usually fairly non-controversial. A farm bill is one of those things that people on both sides of the aisle really like. This one, though, fell victim to some infighting. Take a look at the final vote count there. You'll see Republicans, by and large, voted this down. Final vote was 213 to 198. Republicans voting no, 30. Republicans not voting at all, 10. That was the difference maker there. And this got caught up in a battle between Republican conservatives and their own leadership over immigration. They wanted to vote on a hardline immigration matter. They weren't convinced that they were getting what they've been promised from their leadership, so they voted this bill down. So that's the end of that for now.
So let's deal with some of the misleading things. 198 for, 213 against. And there were no Democrat votes in favor. They had united support from the Democrats to vote it down. Therefore, to say that the Republicans voted it down is incorrect. 40 Republican votes were not cast in favor of the bill. 30 were against it, and another 10 were simply not cast at all. They didn't vote. So the majority of votes against this thing still came from the Democrat Party. Getting past that, I understand what they're trying to do, but it matters how you say things. It would simply be better or more accurate to break down the voting by party, for and against. They didn't do that. The other issue that they did not mention was there's a second issue why this bill was opposed by the conservatives in the Republican Party. There's two. And as I said, normally this has, bipartisan support. Did in 2008, last full year, I guess, of the of the George W. Bush administration. It failed to get that support under Obama, and now it has failed to get that support under Trump. Now, in this particular audio clip, you heard that there was an issue about a promise for a vote on immigration. Immigration has been an issue in American politics since before this campaign, but definitely brought to light during the Trump campaign and made a significant policy point so far during his administration. There is still no comprehensive immigration reform. And there is a bill pending that Republicans want to see, or at least some Republicans want to see, come to a vote. And they believe they were promised by their leadership to get it to a vote. And gosh darn it, the leadership just hadn't come through. But they want this farm bill. They made it very clear. You won't give us what we asked for, that what you promised you would get, we will not give you what you want. Political quid pro quo. I don't have a problem with that. There's another issue, and we need to get into both of them, that did not come up in this particular audio that you heard. And that is an increased work requirement for food stamp recipients. So what are we talking about here? For the food stamps, the House Farm Bill, which just got voted down, it proposed stricter work rules for most able-bodied adults in the food stamp program. And that program provides an average of $125 per month in grocery money to more than 42 million people. Under the proposal, adults will have to spend 20 hours per week either working or participating in a state-run training program as a condition to receive benefits. Hold up here. What you're basically saying is that people who want to receive $125 a month free, otherwise free money, you know what? You need to do something for it. Work part-time or participate in training that will get you at least part-time work. For you who are able-bodied, tell me the American person, the person who really understands and believes in America as something other than a place where somebody can be born to, who has a problem with people who are quote-unquote receiving public assistance working their way off of public assistance. I don't know of anyone. And it doesn't say every adult, it says able-bodied. If there's nothing wrong with you, there's no reason why you can't go work part-time, particularly in an economy that is now growing faster than it has in the last 8 years prior. You should not have a big problem finding at least part-time work. Or if you can't find part-time work, or if you choose not to, you need to participate in a program that is training you to be able to have the skills to go get at least 20 hours of part-time work. Please explain why anyone would oppose that. Now, we do have this issue because states do not have enough training slots to accommodate the perhaps 7 million adults who would be subject to the requirement. The bill also provides an additional $1 billion per year to scale up those training programs. So the government was going to make sure that you had every opportunity to get trained, but that you were going to work or train for work in order to get benefits for which other people pay. You got a problem with that? Now, the controversy was Democrats and the anti-hunger advocates say most states don't have the capacity to scale up either case management or training programs to this extent. Seriously? So we should continue to not require people to work because government should continue to do everything for people because another level of government can't do enough. That's your argument? It sucks as an argument. But that was one of the issues. And Democrats, of course, Democrats do not want people to work for money. That is not their mode of operation. People who work for their money tend not to vote Democrat. If what I said was not the case, you would not have 31 out of 50 governors in the United States who are Republican. You would not have 67 or 68 of 99 state legislative chambers in the hands of a Republican majority. You would not have a majority of Republicans in the House. You would not have a majority of Republicans in the Senate, and Donald Trump would not be president. The truth of the matter is that the American people do not like the idea of people who can work getting benefits and not working. Now, the other thing is about immigration. What is it about immigration that's a problem? Well, what they wanted was a vote on the Goodlatte proposal. That was a bill that the GOP leadership promised its members that they would get a vote on, get a floor vote on. Well, they didn't follow through on that so far, and there's not a whole lot more on the agenda, and there's not necessarily really all that much time left in the current legislative session when you take into account that this is an election year and people are going to be on the campaign trail. That proposal contains some provisions that people didn't necessarily like, including mandatory worker verification. Now, I don't know who doesn't like that except for progressives. Cracking down on sanctuary cities. I think there's growing sentiment that needs to occur. Changing asylum thresholds and cutting legal immigration to the U.S. by 25%. Cutting legal immigration. No, we're not going to take in as many people. Here's something that a lot of people don't understand. We take in more people now than we were ever supposed to, and we've been doing that for about 4 decades. The U.S. population should not even be 265 million people. It is now more than 320 million people, as I understand it, or close to 320 million people. And the reason that has occurred is because Congress, without any notification to the electorate, decided to simply raise immigration levels. We have significant problems in this country because of those raised levels. And most of them are social problems that play out politically because you keep bringing people in at an expanded rate that are not bought in to what America is about before you allow them to stay here. In other words, you treat America as though the world has a right to it, as opposed to treating Americans as having the opportunity to choose those who can enter their home. And that's been done by your government. So this is now being played out in a farm bill that got shot down because this is about the American vision. See, if the American vision is going to be reflected in national government, then the GOP, which is much more in line with the will and vision of the American people, it's up to them to use their majority to make that happen. Americans want accountability in exchange for their generosity to people. And they want that limited to those who are actually in need as opposed to those who actually are hanging around. The vision of America must also be safeguarded from people who would attenuate American values and culture. That's what unchecked immigration does. It attenuates your values. It weakens your culture. It tends to morph it into something that you didn't necessarily want it to be. It needs to stop. And you now have some people in the Republican Party, the Freedom Caucus and the RSC, who are going about the business of making sure that they can put some type of stamp on that where possible. It's not going to be easy. they are lining up with some of the things that came out during the 2016 campaign and were voiced and used by the current president to prevail in that campaign. They are going on those things. But these things are not Trump issues. They are still matters of American thought. Now, another thing about the American vision, in my opinion, is it's really hard to advance that vision if you're a lame duck politician, Paul Ryan. Because you cut yourself off from the people's support. You know what? I'm just here. No one's supporting me anymore. I don't need to be supported because I'm just going to play out the string. What would have been the most appropriate thing for Paul Ryan to do when he announced that he was not going to run for re-election would be to give up the speaker's gavel and allow that to go to someone who was going to be accountable to not only the members of Congress and his conscience, but also to the American electorate. Paul Ryan is no longer accountable. Have you not figured that out? If you don't have to face the voters, you're not accountable to the voters. Maybe you'll remember that open mic moment with Barack Obama and the Russian president. You know, this is my last election. You know, let Vladimir know I'm going to be more flexible after that. Yes, because he wasn't going to have to respond to the American people after that. He didn't have to. He couldn't. This so-called traditionally bipartisan bill has now had 2 rough cycles because finally the American people are starting to have their voice heard. It went rough going in 2013, it's had rough going now. And what's happened since 2008 to 2013? Democrats have been hemorrhaging elected offices at the state and federal level. That hemorrhaging has continued from 2013 to 2018, and it may continue after November of 2018. And now you're starting to see how that plays out in national politics, where now you have people going in and saying, if you want benefits, you need to work. And maybe it's time to stop being so generous to immigrants and start taking care of people who are here as citizens. Well, with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin'.
The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, Israel is now open for business. But unfortunately, bigoted leftists and other enemies have other ideas. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, the enemies of Israel have launched a multifaceted evil attack against Israel's right to have operating embassies in its 3,500-year-old capital. The globalist-inspired International Criminal Court is preparing a phony war crimes investigation against Israel based on false accusations of the terrorist-influenced Palestinian Authority. They are the same beasts who gladly reward jihadists for murdering Americans and Israelis. The United Nations likes to find ways to condemn Israel and stick it to the United States, who still foolishly makes payments to that den of doom. Also, instead of condemning Islamic terrorists, UN officials have forked over 65 million taxpayer dollars for a slush fund to be used against Israel at the International Criminal Court. To condemn a nation for operating in its capital that predates every Muslim/Islamic nation on earth could turn out to be problematic for these continuing to poke the apple of God's eye. I'm Ron Edwards.
Blowing away the myths and revealing the truth. You can continue to blow away the myths with Ron Edwards on Facebook, Twitter, and theronedwards.com. Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin'.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force of Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we've had another school shooting, which is in and of itself, of course, unfortunate, tragic, every adverse adjective that you can come up with to describe something that you never want to see happen at all. Also, predictably, in the wake of this, we have had the progressive double dip. It's a double dip now. Before, all we had were the calls for gun control. Those are errant. Those are misguided. Gun control is not the issue. Well, these kids, if they didn't have guns, they wouldn't do. You don't forget the guy had pipe bombs and other things, pressure cookers and the other stuff. He was going to kill somebody, and you weren't going to be able to stop him. Not that way. Anyway. But, well, first of all, let's go ahead and level set this. This happened on the 18th of May, which was a Friday. And on the 20th of May, NBC, on their Sunday program, did this story to kind of give a recap of the events.
10 people were killed, 13 wounded at the school. Investigators are still working to establish a clear motive, but they believe the gunman acted alone. Meanwhile, this community is coming together, refusing to postpone a much-anticipated playoff game in the wake of the tragedy.
In Texas, a display of defiance.
This is what it's supposed to be about. This is about humanity and loving one another.
Santa Fe High's baseball team in a powerful playoff game, honoring the 8 students and 2 teachers who were gunned down. Star pitcher Rome Schubert was shot in the head and survived.
The doctor said that if it would have been any up, any down, any left, any right, that I would have been paralyzed or killed. I'm probably about the luckiest guy alive right now.
Among the dead, 17-year-old Chris Stone, who was on the football team. His teammates are devastated.
He's just that guy that always brightens up the room with a smile.
Today, a funeral is scheduled for Sabika Sheikh, an exchange student from Pakistan. The community also mourning the loss of Shayna Fisher, Angelique Ramirez, and Kimberly Vaughn. Teacher Cynthia Tisdale leaves behind 8 grandchildren. Family says she'd gone back to work after her husband was diagnosed with cancer. Officer John Barnes is in critical but stable condition after confronting the gunman.
The men in blue, that's why they take that oath, to protect and serve, and he was certainly doing that.
Authorities say Demetrius Bagorci surrendered and confessed to the deadly shooting. He's now being held without bail, charged with capital murder.
I've met with him twice. I can't tell you why this happened at this point. I don't think if you gave me unlimited time with him that I would know the answer at this point.
Police say the 17-year-old wore a trench coat, carried a shotgun and a revolver, and told investigators he did not shoot students he did like so he could have his story told.
I hope he sits there and rots in prison for the rest of his life.
Houston Texans star J.J. Watt has now offered to pay for the victims' funerals, the first of which is scheduled for later today. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he'll hold a series of roundtable discussions later this week to discuss how best to protect students in schools. Willie.
Gabe Gutierrez on another bleak morning, this one in Santa Fe, Texas. Gabe, thanks so much.
This is just astonishing to me. I have all these powerful and intelligent and political leadership type people who keep coming back to the same thing. They don't know what happened or why. When I say don't know what happened, they don't know what's going on in schools where this could occur. Because with the exception of, I believe, Sandy Hook, these school shootings are not people. Well, there's also the one in Florida where that was a student who had been expelled and he came on. He was not a student. But for the most part, these are not people coming from outside the school. They're people who go to the school, who then turn on the folks they attend school with. They turn on the teachers. They turn on their fellow students. But you guys don't know what's happening. And now we're going to have roundtable. And I have a lot of regard for Greg Abbott as a governor. I think I have a relatively high opinion of him. But you don't know what's going on either? Nobody seems to know what's going on. That is what gets me. So let me get this straight. All the white progressives and their pets of color have determined it's a white boy thing because ain't nobody shooting nobody at school but white boy. Let me help you out with that. If we're going to talk about people dying, school shootings maybe kill 100, 150 people a year. So that's all, and so that's all white boy doing. So that's a terrible thing. Look at the white people. Okay, 52% of murder victims in this country happen to be black. 92% of the perpetrators of those murders are black. When you put those numbers together with the more than 15,000 murder victims in the U.S., we're talking about 7,800 black people murdered every year. 92% of that 7,800 is murdered by other white people. Please, by other black people. Spare me the white devil commentary because you got no room to say that. I'm not worried about a couple of hundred versus 7,000. The numbers don't wash. So if I'm going to be concerned about what's happening there with a couple of hundred, please explain to me why you're not asking the question what's happening with 7,000, nearly 8,000 black people every year killed in the doggone streets. How come you're not asking that question? Oh, well, because there's no racism when it's black on black. Yeah, okay, I got you. It's nonsense, but I got you. And then there's, of course, the gun control argument. We need common sense gun control. You got common sense gun control throughout Illinois. You can't have a gun outside your house. You can't transport a gun loaded or unloaded. You can't do anything in Illinois. And how's that popping off in Chicago? Anybody obeying that? If it doesn't work where it's deployed, what makes you think it's going to work elsewhere? Well, Texas isn't Chicago. Exactly. But it ain't working in Illinois either. I guess here's my point. I don't really need to postpone it any longer. How is it that you guys are missing what's actually going on here? Let me give you this extended piece of audio from a Houston affiliate, KHOU, interviewed a student on the day of the event afterward. And just listen to the end, and she's going to give you a clue.
Our Jason Miles is also in Santa Fe. He is now at the district headquarters, and I believe he has a student that he is speaking with. Jason?
Yeah, throughout the day, we've seen students, we've seen parents, teachers at some point came and spoke to law enforcement here at the building behind me. Here with me now is Santa Fe High School senior Daisy Sullivan. 2 weeks from now, you'd be graduating. Not sure how this will impact that, but tell me your thoughts right now.
I'm just really hoping it's over. It didn't happen. I just keep thinking that it's a dream, and then I'm going to wake up any minute now and it's going to be over.
Where were you this morning, and tell me what happened.
I was upstairs in my English class taking a test, and then out of nowhere, like, a fire alarm went off, and we were like, oh, yay, like, we get out of the test, we don't have to take the test right now. And then as we're walking out, I grabbed my friend Cece, I was like, okay, let's go downstairs. And then as I get downstairs, my boyfriend was walking out the history hallway, and I was like, okay, well, let's go, and let's wait for the fire drill to be over. And as we got out of there, we were just waiting, and the teachers kept telling us to move, like, random places. They told us to move, like, on the grass, and then, like, away from the art room. And so we're like, okay, and then we heard 2 loud pops, and I was thinking, like, maybe it was, like, the giant trash can lids falling on itself. And I was like, okay, it was just a pop. And then a girl ran up to me, and she was, like, breathing hard, and I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, I just heard 2 gunshots. And I was like, there's no way it was gunshots. Like, don't worry, just calm down. It's going to be okay. And then we heard 4 more, or I think it was about 4 more. And I was like, okay, something's wrong. And then Mr. Vaughn, the ex-Marine teacher, he, like, ran around the corner, and he was like, yo, we all need to run. So we just took off running, and then I didn't want to lose my boyfriend, so we just grabbed each other's hands, and we ran as far as we could, as fast as we could.
And later you discovered one of your friends was injured in the shooting?
Yes, her name's Brianna. I believe that it said that she was shot in the leg, but she's okay.
Tell me your thoughts about her right now. What are you hoping?
I really hope that it didn't damage anything in her leg and she can actually walk on it later. Because I know, like, there's a lot of, like, important things in your leg, and if it gets hit, there's no way you can save some of it. So I just really hope that, like, everything goes okay and everything, like, the bullets out and all that.
I overheard another reporter asking you questions about, the whole gun debate, other school shootings. You've grown up in a generation where this has become, unfortunately, rather common. It's been a long time since I was in high school. I would never have fathomed the threat of a school shooting. What is it like to be in this position? Did you ever think this could happen at Santa Fe?
I thought it could happen. Like, I was surprised but not shocked about it because the way some of the kids are treated at the high school, like, from other kids, because other kids just don't care anymore. Like, they're like, oh, wow, look, I'm older than you. Oh, look, I'm taller than you. Oh, look, I'm bigger than you. And they still pick on people no matter what. And sometimes it just pushes people off the edge.
Do you think the young man who is suspected of shooting your fellow students this morning was a victim of bullying?
Probably, honestly. Like, I didn't know him that well. I only seen him in the hallway, and he looked like he was a normal kid. Like, he didn't seem like he was going to do anything like this. But there's some mean people in our school that don't care, and they'll pick on anybody because they're smaller than them.
Well, Daisy, I appreciate you speaking with us, and I know your fellow classmates and schoolmates and those injured are in your thoughts and prayers. And tonight there's at least 2, maybe 3 vigils taking place for people to gather and send their thoughts as well. Guys, it's still an emotional scene out here, and it will be for some time here in Santa Fe.
Students don't care. Bullying. No regard for people within the school. They're taller, they're bigger, they're whatever, and therefore they just take advantage of. Really? So this girl just stood there on tape and told you what the problem was, and you think gun control laws are going to take care of that? Do you? Do you think what color someone is going to change that? Here's another student on the day of the event. His name is Dustin Severin. He's an 11th grader, and he told a local TV station that the shooter, Demetrius Pagortiz, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, was bullied on the regular.
So he was really quiet. He mostly kept to himself, and I know he was picked on. He was picked on by coaches, other students. Didn't really talk to anyone.
Yeah. So what have you seen other students like saying or doing?
I mean, my friends from the football team told me that coaches say that he smelled like right in front of his face, you know. And then like other kids just sit there, like look at him, laugh at him, talk about him. Nothing like physical, but they still, you know, emotionally bullied him.
So the coaches on the football team are telling him that he stinks in front of other kids, in front of his face. That's what they're doing. You heard the words of the senior, the young lady who goes to the school, who says that is a predominant theme at the school, that if you're bigger, if you're taller, if you're quote unquote smart, whatever it is, whatever advantage someone thinks they have at that school, they use that to belittle others at the school. But you still don't understand what the problem is. You don't understand what's going on where someone would want to lash out and do something. Let me help you out, because I know a lot of you need us to get to the chase real quickly. You took God out of the schools in the 1960s. And you've had generation after generation now, 3 or 4 generations now, of increasing godlessness. You took God out of the schools in the 1960s. You basically brought a Holocaust into the American womb in 1973. You have been telling children for generations now that God is not important and they are optional. And then you're surprised that you get more bullying in the school where they do not pray. Well, they said the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, the Pledge of Allegiance just mentions God. I'm surprised they got away with that. But it is Texas. But God's not present in these schools. Unions are, but God isn't. Progressive indoctrination is, but God isn't. How evil white people are for slavery, that's in every school, including in Texas, but God's not present. We don't talk about him. Islam even shows up in the school, but the actual God does not, because Islam does not have a real God. Allah is not God, never has been. So I wanted you to get this straight. You're going to have all these round tables. You're going to have all these discussions. You're going to do all this stuff, and you're going to miss the problem. Gun laws aren't going to do it. You have a lack of humanity in the schools, and that's always the case where you take God away. That's why the Democrat Party can't win, because godlessness does not befit a people in the long run, and that's why they're rejected. They have no message because they are godless. You want to fix this? Because we've always had guns in this country. We haven't always had this outbreak of school shootings. But about 50 years ago, you removed the symbol for morality, for ethical behavior, and for proper treatment of human beings from American education. And American education on many fronts has suffered ever since. And now you have the kids turning on each other, playing executioner because they're tired of being treated like the bottom of somebody's shoe. You can't figure that out and come to a conclusion about what to do? Then bump you and wait for the next school shooting. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we have the epitome, the height of royal Negro hypocrisy on display in the aftermath and in the build-up, too, as a matter of fact, the royal wedding in Great Britain. What do I mean by that? We have the same blacks who on social media and elsewhere who decry systemic racism and white privilege as these twin evils and the bane of the existence of people of color in this country and throughout the world. Why are you falling all over yourselves because a red-headed prince married a half-white woman? Why would that even matter to you? But I have seen particularly black females, and black females, particularly on social media, are some of the most ardent. I mean, they need to have the black turtlenecks and the combat, combat camouflage pants. They need to have them brought out in special fit for them because they are so militant in their words. You got to understand this systemic racism. That's why the police, and that's why this, and that's why that. That's why you can't get no loan. It's the systemic racism. And these same chicks are just, oh, it's so wonderful that Prince she found Prince Harry. Let me get this straight. You want to claim this half-white woman because her father is. Let me remind you guys of this. The bloodline goes through the male. That's a white bloodline you're talking about. Mr. Markle is a white man. His seed is what produced it. Well, she was in a black vessel. You know, let me help you out. It don't matter what soil I plant an acorn in, I'm going to get an oak tree. You get me? You get me? Nevertheless. So, but this is amazing. And I have people, well, she's biracial. And then I ran into one just absolute silly person who's just trying to get everybody to just ignore the fact that her father's white and just say she's black. She's black. That's all that matters. She black. Okay. And actually brought up indirectly the one drop rule, which was intended to keep black folk from ever being recognized at all in any way, shape, or form as citizen type equals, as her justification for calling Markle black. I don't get this. Well, you have that group. Either they're falling all over themselves with joy and pride or something because Prince Harry is marrying this half-white woman, Meghan Markle, or they're working overtime to distance themselves from this whole ridiculousness. And I put myself more in the latter category. I'm like, you know what? I'd rather watch golf. I would have rather watched the Preakness, and I can't stand horse racing. I'd rather watch paint dry. I'd rather watch dried paint dry than sit up and subject myself to watching a royal wedding. I have no interest. Maybe people forgot that when we did this back in the 80s, I believe it was, maybe it was 1981, when Prince Charles married Diana, who was white as she could be, virgin as she could be, turned out to be as unwanted as she could be, and died like a fool. Now, Markle has already been divorced once. She's another outsider. Yeah, but Harry's not like Charles. Is Harry Charles' son again? Help me out. Because if Harry is Diana's son, then he's also Charles' son. And as I said, the bloodline goes through the male. So you think Harry's going to be, and Queen Elizabeth ain't changed, and the rest of the royal family ain't changed. Well, Harry's brother married a white woman. And they're kicking out kids like you want a royal lineage to do. We want heirs. And when Harry figures out that his kids ain't got no shot, it could all play out differently. But you know what? At the end, it's not the bloodline itself, it's the emotional attachment to it that's going to play out. So we'll see where that really is with the good prince. But let's go back to why should blacks even care about this? Because I'm having a hard time with that. Because Great Britain actually instituted the slave trade here in North America. I mean, it came with them. Didn't start out in the 1600s necessarily, but we started getting slaves brought over here in ships, and that was while this place was a colony of Great Britain. Am I wrong about that? And as far as empirical or imperialist powers that all the woke folk are against, I'm trying to think of anyone that is historically is a greater imperialist power than Great Britain. Perhaps some of you are still familiar with the saying that was true not all that long ago from a historical standpoint: the sun never sets on the British Empire. That little island had stuff going on all over the globe. And it was a true saying: the sun never set on the British Empire. They were out to have their fingers in, or an iron grip on, every part of the globe. So the UK's history with the Angles, from which the name England is derived, it just oozes with systemic racism and white privilege. They haven't had a black king. There's not one who came out there with a, with a red, black, and green flag or anything like that, or that, black, yellow, and green Jamaica thing. I ain't seen it. I ain't seen one denouncing the Church of England. Church of England ain't known as a place where you're going to get your ribs and potato salad after service. I don't see that. The UK is about as white privilege and systemic racism as you're going to get from a cultural input standing, in my opinion. So, for all those reasons, the slave trade, the imperialism, and the cultural privilege and systemic racism that goes with the UK's history, why would I, as a black person, give a rat's behind about a royal wedding in England? I can't get anybody to give me an answer to that. Well, what about Diana? Diana wasn't black. Why did you care about that? You cared about Diana? And it's like, well, I remind you again. And how did Diana end up? And Diana was white. And Diana was a virgin. And everybody in her family, matter of fact, they were connected. I think her brother was a viscount or something like that. Didn't end well for her. But we'll see what happens with this kind of goes back to the age-old claiming of everything is black. If it's kind of like if a black man blew his nose and snot fell on a telephone pole, then it's a black telephone pole. That's almost the way certain people think. They will claim everything, and now they're trying to claim the monarchy, and they're going back and saying, yeah, so-and-so, somebody's great-grandmother, she was an octoroon or something like that. And really? An octoroon is 1/8 black. 1/8, which basically means they are more something else than they are black. And most of the times, generally speaking, that is Caucasian. So what you want someone to say is that because somebody generations ago was 1/8 black, that now we just need to break out the shoe polish on them. Is that what you're trying to say? Everybody's not black. Biracial is not black. An octoroon is not black, biologically speaking. None of that really matters in almost any way, shape, or form. And by the way, while everybody is either trying to get close to this royal wedding business or as far away from it as they can, and I'm closer to the latter group than the former group, need I remind you that while you worried about the royal folk in England, the kings and queens, that as y'all like to call them over here in the hood in North America, are cutting up. While you worrying about royalty, real royalty, over in a foreign land, these fake royal folks that you done anointed over here need adult supervision, and you're not providing that. And there is the hypocrisy again. You're worried about what's going on in somebody else's country and talking about what's wrong with that. But what's going on with your people up under your nose in your country, you're offended if someone brings that to your attention. You're honestly offended. For reasons of my own, I came across a video of a fight, an improbable fight. It was between a black man and a black woman who, according to the caption, had a child together, weren't married, and there was some type of argument whereby he walks up on her in her queen's attire, shorts, t-shirt, flip-flops, socks, or sandals and socks. And he's got on his t-shirt and shorts and a knee brace, baseball cap. And it goes down. He's got an argument for her. He takes one swing at her and misses entirely. She didn't have the sense to get the heck out of Dodge. He loaded up on her again. He clocks her and knocks her out. And while that's going on, you got people filming. And I guarantee you there's some dudes filming, and there's some woman screaming at him, calling him all kinds of names for hitting a woman. But I noticed that every time you find this going on, all the black folk who are there have nothing to say and less to do to address or stop the nonsense. But everyone is concerned about racism. There wasn't a white person in that film. And most of the films that you see where black people are not at their best, well, that's filmed by other black people, by the way. And those who are embarrassed by it would rather act like it doesn't occur than turn that embarrassment or upset or outrage into some type of action or standard whereby they denounce this behavior among themselves. That's a problem. And until that problem is addressed, nobody cares what black folks have to say about white racism or white privilege or systemic this or anything. Because you got bills you ain't paying in your own home. Don't go asking for anybody else's money to deal with your problems. And I have no idea why a wedding in Great Britain between a white man and a white woman, or at least a half-white woman, makes a bit of difference to somebody in Chicago, in Detroit, in Baltimore, in Atlanta. I don't see it. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. We were told that if you put body cams on police officers, then we would finally get to the bottom of all the police misconduct and the mistreatment of citizens, particularly citizens of color. Much the same way we were told that if you made the laws against the trafficking of rock cocaine as stringent as they were for powder cocaine, that we would remove the scourge of drugs from the black community. Well, we know where we are 30 years later on drugs. Guess where we're headed with the cameras? Here is your case in point. Jamie Moultrie is a minister, a reverend, a pastor, and the president of the NAACP in Timminsville, South Carolina. Recently, he went on Facebook to talk about how he had been racially profiled in a traffic stop. Well, here is that traffic stop in its entirety, and I will let you decide for yourself.
Hey, how are you? I'm all right. I'm Officer Miles with the Timminsville Police Department. Yes, sir. Got your license, registration, proof of insurance on you? Okay, that's fine. Go right ahead. You don't own the motor vehicle?
Yes, sir. I just transferred these.
You just transfer? Okay. What's your name?
Jamie Moultrie.
Okay. You got your driver's license on you, Mr. Jamie? But the reason why I'm coming in contact with you is whenever you took the left right here, you didn't signal. Okay, that's the only reason why I'm coming in contact with you, okay? Sit tight for me, okay?
Central.
Central 205 Unit Code 4, 10-9-27 South Carolina.
Good.
004-399-321.
10-4. Confirm that 1028 is Papa India 5439.
Affirmative. Papa 439.
10-4. Do you advise us to go back on a Mercedes?
10-4. Is it registered to a 1992 GMC? Sierra. 10-4.
Hi, Cedar is clear on Moultrie out of Timminsville with priors to the C-120s are clear.
10-4, taking. All right, Ms. Moultrie, here you go, okay? You register. Try not to drive the car no more until you get the proper documentation, because this registration has to come back to a 1992, okay, GMC truck. That's even in the system as that too, but what I'm saying, you got to have the proper registration and everything, and insurance and all that stuff to actually indicate that plate comes back to this motor vehicle, okay? Because when I run the plate, it's still coming back to this. It's not coming back to your car.
Okay, I understand that, but look, I just bought the car the other day. I switched the tags.
Well, you probably need to go to the DMV and ask them how come it's not registered. In the state of South Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles, it's still coming back to that truck.
I understand that, but this is what I'm telling you. I switched the tags from the truck to the car. They told me at DMV, the dealer put that on there to show that the tag's going to be transferred.
Right.
And all I need to do is keep this registration in there and this bill of sale.
They told you wrong. You got to have the proper documentation in your motor vehicle that actually matches the car that you're operating on South Carolina highways in order for it to be legal to operate on South Carolina highways. They told you wrong, okay?
All right.
All right. Other than that, there's your driver's license. Just make sure you wear your seatbelt at all times while operating motor vehicle on South Carolina highways and drive safe, okay?
Yep, he was profiled because of his race, correct? Because that's what he said on Facebook. He said tonight, he posted this on 13 April, tonight I was racially profiled by Timminsville officer because I was driving a Mercedes-Benz and going home in a nice neighborhood. Did you hear that? I didn't. He said the officer asked him if there were any drugs inside his car. Did you hear a request to ask if there were any drugs in the car? I didn't hear that. He said in this post that the officer told him, I'm doing you a favor tonight by not taking you to jail or writing you a ticket. Did you hear anything about him even being asked to get out of the car? I didn't hear that. Now, also, I heard on the radio something about Jamie Moultrie with priors coming back from dispatch. The officer didn't say anything about his priors to Mr. Moultrie. The only thing he did was tell him that his car was improperly tagged. It had improper license tags, and that's a violation of South Carolina law. He did not even cite him for that. So Jamie Moultrie, Reverend Jamie Moultrie, NAACP President Jamie Moultrie lied, flat out, bald-faced, and was caught on camera. I'm ecstatic about it because it is finally going the way it's supposed to. The progressive chickens are starting to come home to roost before the American people, who will see this and understand that this dude's just a liar. And they're going to come to that conclusion about other black progressive political operatives. Oh, you mean like Marvin McKinstry Jr. in Baltimore. He had a traffic stop back on the 13th of April, the same day that Jamie Moultrie made his Facebook post. And here's the reporting from a local Baltimore TV station about what happened in that encounter.
A common sight all over the city. Doesn't matter if parking spaces are available, but it's illegal.
Bakertown, I have a car stop 200 block.
Back on April 13th, a city police sergeant attempted to enforce the law.
How you doing, sir? Sergeant McGowan, Baltimore City Police. This interaction is being recorded. I need your license and registration.
The driver is Marvin McKinstry, the chair of a task force appointed to improve civilian oversight of city police under the DOJ consent decree. He had just dropped off a passenger.
Are you refusing to give me your license and registration, sir? It's a lawful order.
The officer has every right to approach the vehicle and do it exactly as the officer did here. It would raise suspicions if somebody decides to not comply.
License and registration, sir. Can I just get an estimate on how many times I have to say this to you, sir?
You don't have to
license and registration, sir.
That I'm not going to cooperate with you having a problem with me dropping off a
License. This gentleman was being defiant from the beginning. The officer would have simply probably cited him or even given him a warning.
But he stopped me for letting my colleague out the car.
License and registration.
Or what?
Or you will be subject to arrest. I don't need you to let me. I don't need you to let me, sir. Because I think that you're letting your emotion get the better of you, sir.
McKinstry finally handed over his license. He got 5 tickets totaling $500. He refused to sign them.
There's your license. You're free to go. Do not stop in the middle of traffic, whether you have your flashers on or not. It's against the law. Have a nice day. Thanks for your cooperation.
According to the mayor's office, the police told them that the tickets have not been satisfied. McKinstry has not responded to repeated requests for an interview. Reporting live at East Baltimore, David Collins, WBAL TV 11 News.
Now, McKinstry, who looks like a chocolate version of the Poppin' Fresh Doughboy, on the 13th of April, he was given tickets. By the 4th of May, they had not been satisfied. Well, on the 8th of May, Baltimore 11 went out, and they actually got a response from Mr. McKinstry. Oh, Mr. McKinstry is also a minister, a man of the cloth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And here was what they got from McKinstry on the 8th of May.
To have that traffic stop derail what I've stood for the last 3 years.
Marvin McKinstry called the encounter with a Baltimore police sergeant the result of a misunderstanding.
Are you refusing to give me your license and registration, sir? It's a lawful order.
McKinstry refused to comply with the sergeant's demand for his license and registration for more than 45 minutes during a traffic stop last month. McKinstry had been asked to move his car when he was double parked.
I was asked to move out of the road, and after I moved out of the road, I was pulled over, and I didn't understand at that time. And my attempts to get some clarity and understanding were met with what was quoted to be lawful demands. And maybe I just believe in the process that we're at a place now where we should be able to have conversation beyond lawful demands.
McKinstry resigned as chair of the Community Oversight Task Force. He remains on the panel. It is appointed to improve civilian oversight of the police department under the consent decree.
I do recognize that there's another course of action I could have taken, and I would be less than a man, less than a leader, to suggest that if I was in that same situation, I would do the exact same thing again. I wouldn't.
One white member of the task force today suggested if McKinstry was white, the traffic stop would have gone differently. The new task force chair said the incident is a reminder of the city's history of negative encounters between black men and police.
There are issues with engagement with police officers and how they present to our residents.
McKinstry told us today the tickets he was issued are still active. He said he wants to meet with the sergeant, Terrence McGowan, who was involved in the encounter. Not about those tickets, he says, but about the encounter itself. The task force, meantime, has sent a letter about the incident, about the change in leadership, to the federal judge that oversees the consent decree. You can read that letter in its entirety on our website at WBALTV.com. Reporting live tonight from East Baltimore, I'm Jane Miller, WBAL TV 11 News.
So as a man, as a leader, 3+ weeks after you've been issued these tickets, you still haven't satisfied them. The next day, on the 9th, the mayor of Baltimore called into question whether or not he would remain on the task force. My question is, how do we get to that point after the 14th of April? That behavior is ridiculous. Busted by the camera, and you're still debating as to whether or not this man is an appropriate person for oversight of police. He can't even oversee himself. Add him to the list of black folks, prominent quote-unquote black folks, busted on camera. There's Dorothy Bland of Texas, the college professor who was found windmilling in the street, walking in the middle of the street in her own neighborhood, granted, walking in the street as opposed to on the sidewalk, waving her arms around, looking like she was an escapee from an asylum, saying that she had been mistreated by the police, but the dash cam caught her. I already talked about Minister Poppin' Fresh. I already talked about Jamie Moultrie, who also has an arrest record. So he's had an arrest record, he's a minister, he's an NAACP president, and he's lying on camera. Bless his heart. I'm not even going to add to that, though I could. Or let's put it this way, it just doesn't include people like Lamar Lathan, former NFL linebacker, Houston Oilers and others, who lied about the police. Taraji P. Henson, the actress, who lied about an encounter with police involving her son and later had to apologize to the Glendale police for what she had accused them of doing. Then there's Michael Bennett, who lied through his teeth about what happened in Las Vegas. And then subsequently, now he's been charged with assault and bodily injury to a paraplegic elderly white woman, and he's awaiting trial for that. And in Michael Bennett's case, he was caught on camera lying, saying, they put a gun to my head, they did all this stuff, they made me afraid for my life. They didn't do any of that. And the Las Vegas Police Department went to what is actually in the unusual step of looking to the NFL, saying, you need to investigate this clown. Of course, the NFL is not going to investigate their clowns. They don't do that, because then, the inmates might get restless, and they can't have that. If only it stopped there. Some of you may have heard of Dawn Hilton Williams, who was stopped for speeding. She was clocked, according to the officer, doing 70 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. And she was driving a rental car. Says she was going from one part of South Carolina to another, state in which she lives, because her daughter was involved in a tennis tournament. All this stuff that doesn't make a bit of difference. And when she was handed the ticket, she said, I'm not going to sign that. And the officer told her, well, you don't have that right. If either you sign the ticket or I'm going to take you into custody. I'm going to take you out of the car and arrest you and impound your vehicle, have it towed. She went on to record a video saying how she was threatened and bullied. I said, no, you're given a choice. The same choice most people in all 50 states in the union have. If you are given a traffic citation, you can sign the citation, which is not an admission of guilt, and then show up and resolve the ticket later. If you don't want to do that, you're saying you want to be arrested, because that's what the ticket gets you out of. So you have political black folks, you have entertainer and athlete black folks, you have common black folks lying about their encounters with police and lying into a camera. Lying. So here is my question. When are you going to start calling these people out for what they are? Because all this goes to show that regarding the special mental condition that is negrosity. That's what I call it. Now, you can't fix it. I know you can't fix it. But right now, you can catch every little T9G bit of it on law enforcement video. For black folks, you need to know something. Every time one of these folks who you believe is an upstanding member of the community displays this kind of foolishness, they're hurting you. You need to replace them. Baltimore can't figure out what to do with Minister Poppin' Fresh. He should have been gone. Timminsville, South Carolina, I haven't heard any announcement that they've replaced their NAACP president. I have other people don't even want to go. There are other people down there who don't even want to go see the video because they want to believe him and not believe what the camera says. This type of lack of integrity among black people is why you have no political influence that matters. That is why all of your political agenda items, whatever they may be, are ignored. You can keep this up. So all the black people who think you're better than them, I ain't like them. I say, you know what? They're still representing you whether you like it or not. Well, all black people aren't alike. Well, you know what? If all we see on camera is black people lying about their encounters with police, then there's no reason to pay attention to you when you say something different. Now, is there? Fix it. And that's our show. May God keep you and bless you is my prayer. And until next week, just take care of yourselves and take care of those you love. Until then, see you.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.